Hello everyone, it's Paul at the Garland County Library, and tonight's program is with Nalissala Allen, who goes by Ranger Lisa. She is a Hot Springs National Park Ranger, and tonight's program is called Be Positive. Ranger Lisa is here to present about pollination and the essential role it plays in our ecosystems, and she's also going to tell us a little bit about a couple of the events happening with Hot Springs National Park. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and if there's any questions for her at the end, as always, I'll be sure to read them all.
Well, hello everybody. As you can see, I'm sitting in my office in the Fordyce Bathhouse. I would like to thank Garland County Library for giving me the opportunity to be with you guys and to talk about the importance of pollinators. I do have a PowerPoint here, so hopefully we'll get to see some pictures. And I'm going to answer any questions that you might have towards the end. So, let's see here. All right, so today is Be Positive. And the main reason why we want to be positive is because when people think about pollen or hear the word pollen, they start thinking about their allergies. And that is one of the things I might do today is I might cough a little bit, because I'm having issues with the pollen that's in the air. But pollination is an essential part of having a healthy ecosystem, and pollinators play a very significant role in that process of pollination. Hot Springs National Park was established first as a federal reservation in 1832 to protect the unique geothermal spring water and associated lands with public health, wellness, and enjoyment. In 1921, the area became a national park with the same mission to preserve the 47 hot springs that come out of the ground at the base of Hot Springs Mountain and the historic resources built for visitors to enjoy the hot springs. And when most people think of Hot Springs National Park, this is the image that comes to mind. Famous Bathhouse Row on Central Avenue in historic downtown Hot Springs, Arkansas. But is this the park? Or is it just a very small portion of the park? And if you said a very small portion, then you are correct. This is a map of Hot Springs National Park. And Bathhouse Row is right there where you see Visitor Center. Everything in the green is the national park, and everything in the tan is the city of Hot Springs. Today, the park is about 5,500 acres. The purpose of the park, again, is to protect and preserve the 47 thermal water springs. And with that protection, we also get to preserve the natural landscape of the surrounding lands. But have you ever wondered how we were able to cultivate 5,500 acres of land? It's because we have lots of help. Pollination plays a huge role in having a healthy ecosystem. At least 75% of all the flowering plants in the park are pollinated by insects or animals. This amounts to more than 180,000 different types of plants which help stabilize our soil, cleans the air, supplies us with oxygen, and supports local wildlife. Plants also help collect rain to recharge our thermal water systems. So what exactly is pollination? Pollination is a vital stage in the life cycle of all flowering plants. The goal of all living organisms, as well as plants, is to reproduce offspring for the next generation. One way plants reproduce offspring is through making fruits and seeds, which is the product of a very successful pollination. Each plant can self-pollinate. Other plants need a little help to reproduce. It occurs when pollen grains are moved between two flowers of the same species. Here you can see how pollinators visiting flowers and how it actually works. The pollinator visits the flower and it collects the nectar. It moves on to the pollen, then sticks to the pollinator, and it moves on to a new flower where pollen is transferred to another flower. The plant then produces more nectar and attracts more pollinators, so it can reproduce more offspring. The cycle then begins again. It requires multiple visits from multiple pollinators to achieve a successful pollination for a single flower. Now, a pollinator is anything that helps carry pollen from one plant to another. Insects and other animals such as bats, beetles, flies, these are all considered pollinators, and they visit the flowers in search of food, shelter, nesting, building materials, and sometimes even to find their mates. Some pollinators, including many bee species, intentionally collect all pollens, as for other species accidentally collects it. As they're getting food, it kind of gathers on them. So are bees the only pollinators? They're not. There is over 200,000 species of pollinators, and of those, about 1% are hummingbirds, bats, and small mammals. 99% of all pollinators are insects, such as those beetles, bees, and ants, wasps, butterflies, and moths. So what would make a good pollinator? So good pollinators normally have to have tiny little hairs, scales. They've got to be very mobile, able to move from one plant to another. Hummingbirds are the most prominent pollinating bird in North America. It is small and colorful with a very long tapering bill, and it's got a very bristly kind of tongue. The humming noises that you normally hear when hummingbirds are around is the flapping of their wings. They can beat about 80 times per second. This is normally what they call an adaptation, and it is very important when pollinating other flowers. They have the ability to fly back and forth, upside down, and so most of the time it makes it helpful for them to get the nectar deep down in certain flowers that are more like a trumpet shape. The sticky, as they're drinking the nectar, the pollen sticks to their beak, and then when they go to feed to another flower, it actually pollinates that flower. As the hummingbird moves from flower to flower, it spreads the pollen and fertilizes the plant. Another pollinator that we have in the park are going to be bees. Bees are one of the most common and effective pollinators worldwide. There are about 20,000 different species of bees. In North America, there's about 4,000 different species. Native bee species come in a variety of shapes, colors, sizes, and they have all different types of lifestyles that enables them to pollinate a very large, diverse type of plants and flowers throughout the park. Here, you can see on the bee's legs, the pollen is actually starting to gather. Those are little brackish hairs. They're kind of feathery hairs, and the whole bee's body is completely covered with these. Most insects have these little brackish hairs on their bodies, but they're actually use their hairs for a sense of touch. The bees actually use theirs to collect that pollen and move it from flower to flower. The other picture you're going to see is a bee. It's got like a straw-like section that it uses to actually, as it's searching for the nectar, where it actually kind of sucks up the nectar into its body as it's feeding. Again, these are very special adaptations that these bees has actually kind of created throughout the years to better serve from different types of flowers and different pollinating kind of things, from weeds to trees to the flowers and the things that they have. In these two pictures, you can actually see how the bees gather the pollen and they actually collect them. These are known as pollen baskets. So on both legs, you can kind of see there's one that's got kind of a large, the other one's kind of got like saddlebags on both sides. These pollen baskets are made of the long, stiff hairs that curve around the wide, flattened section of the bee's back legs. When they get covered with the pollen, these stiff hairs actually, they kind of comb all the pollen down. and then they kind of create this basket, and they bring this pollen back to their hive. Bees actually eat this pollen. It's kind of more of like a protein for them. Everybody else that collects nectar, they don't really have anything to do with the pollen except for the bees. This is another, this is a wasp. It is known as a Tarantula Wasp. But there are a variety of different species of insects that love the sweet nectar from flowers. This is probably one of the most interesting ones of them all is, again, the Tarantula Wasp. It's a very large blue and black wasp with bright orange wings. While the Tarantula Wasp pollinates plants, as adults, it eats the nectar. But its offspring does not. The reason why they call it a tarantula wasp is because it actually lays its eggs in tarantulas. And that's what its larvae eat. So that's kind of like its host for its young. Now, this is a red admiral, and it is another pollinator that you'll kind of see in the park. Its favorite foods, though, in all honesty, is rotting fruit. It likes to eat sap off the trees, and it will even be seen eating bird droppings. But if it can't find all of its favorite fruit, then it will go and it'll eat the nectar from flowers. Now, butterflies and moths will forage nectar from a variety of native flowers, including asters, goldenrods, and milkweed. But they all have their own favorite host plant. Now, host plants are plants that they lay their eggs on. When the eggs hatches into caterpillars, the caterpillars will eat the plant. So stinging nettles is going to be the host plant for a red admiral. These guys are known as skippers, and they're kind of like the jet fighters of the butterflies. Mostly small, and they're very, very fast. They make up a significant portion of all the butterflies in Arkansas, in just about any other state that's very, very warm. It usually it uses several different species of grass for its host plant. These butterflies will often perch on grass tops, and they'll swirl upwards whenever territorial boundaries are disputed. They'll also chase off other flying insects if they get kind of too close to what they think is in their area. You will normally see a lot of these in gardens and yards, especially if they've got a lot of clover or heel-all plants that's in there. Now, these ones are the pretty butterflies. These are the ones that most everybody kind of likes to look at and chase around, but these are known as Easter tiger swallows, swallowtails. It is the most common and most prettiest southern butterfly or eastern butterfly that's in this region. If you want to attract eastern butterflies, swallowtails, to your yard, it's a good idea to have some wild cherries around, because both the caterpillar and the butterfly love to eat on these. The caterpillar also enjoys feeding on leaves from birch, elm, ash, cottonwoods, and willow trees. In the adult swallowtails, they feed on the nectar from milkweeds and from lilacs. We should start seeing them right about now. Another version of that swallowtail, this is a spice bush, and it is black and blue with a little bit of yellow detailing. They're very common in this area as well. They're also known as a green clouded butterfly. They're very unique in feeding because they always keep their wings moving. So they always, they'll close them and reopen them and close them and reopen them. So this is a white sphinx. It is also known as the hummingbird moth or a hawk moth. They do look a lot like hummingbirds as they're fluttering from flower to flower. They're pretty big in size. Since they are moths, they are out kind of later in the day. Hawk moths are known to have the longest tongue of all the moths and butterflies, and they make great pollinators. As you can see, some fly and some actually will land and hover or land on trees, or land on the leaves. The one that's standing on the leaf, you can actually see his tongue reaching way over into the flower itself. Their caterpillars is the ones that most people know as the tobacco worm or hornworm or the tomato hornworm. Gardeners really don't like these guys because, you know, they're very voracious eaters. They can pretty much destroy a garden. The best way to kind of do them is kind of plant a plant just for them, and they'll stay there as you can share the rest of your garden with other things. But moths themselves, they play a very vital role, but they're overlooked a lot of times because when we think of pollinators, we think of the butterflies and the bees. But moths, since they are out, they do most of their work at night. So they kind of go for the nocturnal flowers that are pale and white, and they've got a very heavy fragrance, kind of more like morning glories or the yucca plant. These are the type of plants that they actually kind of go for later on in the evenings. Another type of pollinator that there is going to be what most people think are pests, but these are flies. Flies actually play a very vital role in the ecosystem because not only do they provide food, or they are food for other species in the park, for birds and other fish, but they help with the decomposing, and they're great for soil conditioning, and they make really great pollinators. There are over 160,000 species of flies, and some of the flies have special relationships with Pacific flowers, while other flies are generalists and they will feed on a wide variety of different types of flowers. The flies that you see here, one actually looks like a bee. It kind of mimics a bee. This bee is known as a syrphid, and it kind of does look like a bee and a wasp. The biggest way that you can tell that it's not a bee is that flies only have one set of wings. As for bees and wasps, they have two sets. The other flies that you can see over here, these are midges. They kind of stick together. You don't just see one. There's a lot of them, and these are really little tiny little guys because that's a dandelion that you can kind of see that they're weaved in deep inside there. Those little guys do bite, so be kind of a little careful when you see those ones. Now, a lot of the problems that everybody's having right now is pollinators are in a decline. And a lot of those reasons that we're kind of losing a lot of our pollinators is because of, loss of habitat, kind of some of the challenges that we're facing is because of the loss of habitat, non-native plants and species being planted, or non-native insects are being introduced into the ecosystem, but pesticides, disease, parasites, and even climate change has a lot to do with losing a lot of our pollinators. So here you can kind of see some really good examples. So loss of habitat, especially in this area, Arkansas, we were known for our lumber, our yellow pine trees. But as we go through and we do a lot of that clear cutting, we lose a lot of that natural habitat they're used to kind of being around. The top pictures is going to be, agriculture, farming. A lot of farms do rely on pollination from the pollinators, but they're losing their nesting sites, and so that's where farming kind of is having some damages. So basically, if they don't have a place where they can nest safely, they can feed, great. But if they don't have a place to go and rest and bring back the nectar to feed the rest of the colony, then that's where they're going to have issues. The further they have to fly away to get back home and to get their food, then it kind of it's more chances that they're not going to make it back. The other thing is going to be urbanization. So this is a picture that most of you guys will recognize. This is the city of Hot Springs. And as you can see, there is a lot of green space there with the trees and stuff, but there was, as we're growing And the more that we build and the more we grow, we're taking away a lot of that natural foods and stuff that they're actually having. So these are going to be some examples of non-native plants, and you'll see some of this in the park, and you'll see a lot of this that people have in their backyards. But honeysuckle and wisteria, they're not native to Arkansas, and they're actually some of them. These are like climbing vines, and they can actually take over a lot of the native plants. And then the two insects that we've got going on in Arkansas right now that we're actually trying to get, that we're trying to battle against, is going to be the emerald ash borer and the gypsy moth. Now, non-native plants may attract pollinators, which their pollinators are still actually able to get the nectar and they're feeding. But the problem with that is that they're not pollinating the native plants if they're going for the non-natives. And it's the same way with the non-native pollinators. They're actually destroying the host plants for a lot of the native pollinators where they lay their eggs. So the negative effect results from the spread of invasive species are becoming evident as we witness the decline in crops and the reduction of the population of of the pollinators themselves. Another thing that we're seeing that is having a big effect on a lot of our pollinators is going to be pesticides. And we use these pesticides to actually, to control weeds and insects on our crops. But we also use pesticides in our yards for like dandelions, and this, the purple one you see down here, this is heel all. These are, what most people consider to be weeds in our front yards. But we either mow them all down or we spray pesticides or herbicides on them to get rid of them. But pesticides are tools used to kill plants, insects, fungi, and other pests. Pesticides can affect pollinators directly, or some types of pesticides may remain in the environment for an extended time, and they affect multiple generations of pollinators. Insecticides applied to plant seeds may, when the plant is mature, it can contaminate the pollen grains. And when the insects take the pollen or eat the pollen, this can actually it doesn't directly kill them, but it can affect their ability to navigate and forage for the food. And herbicides may kill important forage plants for pollinators, like the dandelions and the heel-all. Now, some of our biggest problem that we're having with a lot of pollinators is going to be, diseases. The biggest in them that we're kind of having issues right now is like the colony collapse disorder. This is a high number of bee colonies dying out by the cause of, they just call it this. They're not exactly sure what it really is. It's kind of a mystery to everybody. But it's so bad that a lot of different scientists are still studying. They're trying to figure out what's going on with these things. For a long time, we were kind of wondering, like, where'd all the bees go? Because it kind of like hit very sudden. And this is when we started kind of realizing that there was something kind of going on. Many of our fruits and vegetables were starting to get imported to us because we weren't able to grow them ourselves. Other crops, like soybeans, now they are self-fertilizing, so they kind of fertilize themselves. They don't really need the pollinators, or they're not really dependent on it. So some crops were doing well, but other crops weren't. But it was enough to kind of start looking deeper into the situation. And it got to where a lot of our native pollinators went to being farmed. So like beekeepers and certain scientists were kind of raising these things and trying to figure out what was kind of going on. But fewer natural pollinators combined with increasing agriculture production have resulted in the increased need to contract pollination services. Honeybee hives are placed on trucks each springs, and they're being delivered to different places. And so this is some of the ways that we're trying to fight it, but we're still trying to understand when it comes to certain diseases to other things. Now, the other common things that we've got here, and it's like these poor little guys right here, they having problems with their own kind of version of ticks. And if you guys been out on our trails lately, you understand that ticks is a very big problem. But parasites is a very big thing that's kind of happening around here. Not only are they affecting the actual bees and their larvae, but they're also kind of taking over their homes. These two different parasites right here, the little tick guy that you see on this bee and on these larvae, these are known as Varba Mites. And then you've got the beetle over here with its larvae, and these are Hive Beetles. In the 1990s, these two species, they were kind of accidentally introduced into our culture. But they have devastated several hundred bee colonies within a few years. The only way to control these things, unfortunately, is by using pesticides. And so they can do this, for beekeepers can actually do this, but we haven't figured out how we can get rid of these guys in nature yet. Now, the biggest thing that we're all kind of coming through that's having issues is going to be climate change. And we all realized how bad that was when we all got hit by that snowstorm not too long ago. We wasn't used to having that much snow. But the timing of biological events, such as flowering and leafing out of plants, this kind of lets the plants or let the insects know when it's time to start laying their eggs. And this is kind of a very important stage. And when we're going through climate change, when the plants, it's not warm enough for the plants to grow, or it's still snowing or frosting out, or things come out and bloom, and then all of a sudden we get hit by another snowstorm or something. This has an increase. It kind of kills everything off. And then when hummingbirds are through their migration or on their way here, if the plants are dead, then they don't have anything to eat. Kind of the same thing with certain insects. If they're already out and about and there's a freeze, and the insects die, or the flowers themselves die off. There's several plants in the park. We've already kind of noticed that snowstorm that we went through. Some of our plants are actually dead because they kind of went through a shock system. But an estimate, about 35% of all crop species worldwide depend on the benefit of pollination by the pollinators. 16% of all pollinator species are threatened by extinction, while at least 9% of the insect pollinators are threatened as well. But pollinators are essential partners for farmers who grow fruit, vegetables, nuts, and without them, our species are facing a loss of important components of its food source. So it's something that we're kind of looking at, and the best way that we can kind of do this is hopefully everything will kind of equal itself out. Plants are known to evolve, and they kind of will start kind of protecting themselves. But that's basically what they did already for our pollinators. The plants evolved to have, to attract a special pollinator for it. So hopefully it'll learn how to do its own thing when it comes to climate change. Now we're kind of getting to why pollinators are important to us, and pretty much, do you like to eat? Do you like chocolate, coffee, almonds, apples, bananas? These are all things that are produced by pollinators. They're the ones who pollinate the plants that actually makes that seed, so we can have these things. But 90% of the world's flowering plant species rely on pollinators to help them reproduce seeds and fruits. Pollinators provide services to over 180,000 different plant species and more than 1,200 crops. 1 out of every 3 bites of food that we eat is because it's from pollinators. In our economic terms, pollinators add about $217 billion to the global economics. In the U.S., pollination by honeybees and other insects produce about $40 billion worth of product. Without the action of these pollinators, agriculture and our food supply and surrounding landscapes could collapse. Pollinators may pollinators not only are necessary. Pollinators are not only necessary for their own food, but the support of food and habitats of other animals. Plants and their pollinators may play an important role in a unique role in the ecosystems. Most natural ecosystems would collapse without them. Wildlife depends on the production of seeds, berries, and fruits and for their food. Yet scientists have noticed these hardworking insects and other animals are still in trouble, and some of those plants are endangered because of diminishing pollination. So the big question is what can we do? What can we do to actually stop this or to help these little guys out? A lot of it is, we can plant certain special gardens for them. We can put up special nesting and housing for them as well. Provide places for them to winter and try to limit the use of pesticides as much as possible. But the best thing is just to have a better understanding of the population and, the importance of pollinators, understanding their natural history and biology, work to provide native habitats, and try, you can actually, through citizen science, which is monitoring, you can volunteer to do these things in different ways. You can provide local native food sources, plant their host plants in your yard as well, and then help, again, providing nesting spots with soft dirt, hollow branches, holes in wood, and again, try to limit as much as possible, avoid spraying insecticide on the flowers when they're in bloom. So, which of these would not make a good nesting site? A very well-mannered mowed lawn or a yard that is very full of flowers? Well, the well-mowed lawn does not make a very good nesting site because if it's very manicured, it's always mowed, you're always out there, you're always doing it, you're taking care of it very well, and I don't see a weed in sight, so there's probably a lot of pesticides on that lawn. So what are the two basic habitats that most pollinator needs? They need a diversity of native flowers. They need that be available throughout the season. And they need plants that they can lay their eggs on or nesting sites. Making a place for native pollinators can help preserve the struggling local population. You don't need a lot of space to start a pollinator garden. Even a few containers of flowers can attract hungry bees and butterflies. Food sources, host plants, although pollinators in their adult stage generally thrive on the flower nectar, larva stages generally have, they like to eat the plant leaves. So plant good pollinators or good plants for pollinators is going to be like herbs, coriander, mint, catnip, parsley, even lavender. You can do annuals like marigolds or bachelor buttons or and perennials. You can do bee balm. You can do cornflowers. You can plant these different kinds of things, and this will actually help the bee and the butterflies. Try to plant a combination that ensures something is always blooming during all the different seasons. Another thing you can plant is try to plant some wild grasses and some weeds and some wildflowers like milkweed and Queen Anne's lace. This kind of gives them places where they can rest and also and have nesting places. You also want to make sure that you've got water, lots of good water. Pollinators such as butterflies will gather and sip out of very small shallow ponds or mud pools or bird baths. Bees and wasps, they like mud. And so they'll actually use the mud for homes, for building materials. They'll get a lot of important minerals from the mud as they're drinking. They'll use it as for nesting materials for overwintering. Try to place your flower pots with drain holes at the bottom of it on the ground. Leave twigs and brush on the ground because they like to nest in those as well. Try not to, again, in your home gardens, do not use pesticides or herbicides in or around your pollinator garden. Try even organic pesticides could have some problems with some, or could harm some of the pollinators themselves. So if you kind of plant these little guys or these type of plants, try to plant native is most important, because not only does that, it kind of helps the national park out too with invasive species, but planting these things in your yard actually not only makes your yard pretty, but it also kind of gives, you know, all these little things, pollinators that's in the place, a place where they can actually go eat. Another thing that's very important, again, is their homes. So most bees, as you can see here, the majority of the bees, about 70% of them, they actually nest in the ground. So not all of them have hives that we see. They dig very narrow tunnels that lead into a ground where there's a brood of cells where they raise their young. And 30%, the other 30% of them, of bees, actually nest in wood. So what you're seeing here is a man-made nesting box. They just drilled holes in them. And bees will actually go in there and they'll take that mud during the winter time and they'll close that off, and that actually will keep them warm. You can then take this up and move it into a warmer spot during the winter and then move it out during the summer. But you can place these little nesting boxes all around your garden. You want to face it towards the sun, the morning sun in the morning, so that way it gets nice heat. You do want to keep it somewhat sheltered from the rain, so you want to kind of put it, you know, under a hanging roof or underneath a shed barn or something like that. Now, my big question is, what does these have in common? So what does this billboard have in common with these 3 flower fields that you see? And a lot of it has to do with attraction. The billboard is used to attract people. And so we're trying to attract people to come to our park to help us celebrate our centennial year, which is this year. The bottom ones you can see, these are waysides. These are wildflower areas. Even the state of Arkansas has got a lot of these places along the highway. But the colors of these flowers are made to attract a certain pollinator. And each one of these pollinators, so you can, one off. Here we go. So each pollinators like different things. So birds, if you like to have hummingbirds come to your yard, you're going to want to plant things that are red, pink, orange, yellow, or blue. They don't like white flowers too much. And hummingbirds like the tubular flowers, the ones that kind of look like trumpets. So anything like a trumpet honeysuckle or the irises that we kind of have out in front, those are the type of flowers that they actually like to drink from. Butterflies, they like the red, the purple, the orange, the yellow, and the pink as well. They actually can see in full color, so they can see everything. Butterflies don't really have things that they can't see. As long as it's got a very sweet smell to it, they're pretty much attracted to it. Bees, on the other hand, they can't see red. So if you don't want bees in your yard, then that's the plant you want to plant. But bees can see green, purple, blue, yellow, and ultraviolet. And some of these plants is going to be like the spring beauties that are out right now, as well as the birdfoot violets. A lot of the pollinators will actually come into these, and these are actually wild, so they kind of pop up on their own. But the spiderworts is another favorite, as well as the fire pinks. You've got wild indigo. Butterflies actually love these guys. And obviously, birds aren't going to go to it because it is white. You've got wood sorrel. Bees really like these little guys here, as well as flies and ants. Milkweed is going to be the #1 favorite for all butterflies. So if you like to have a lot of butterflies in your garden, if you plant bitterweed or butterfly weed. And this, again, is heal all, and butterflies and bees both like it as well. These are that trumpet honeysuckles that attract hummingbirds. And then you've got the foxglove bearded tongue on this side. These are all pretty much wildflowers that grow naturally that you can actually get and plant. They're native to Arkansas, so they're actually good to have. There are some flowering trees that also attract a lot of different of our pollinators. You've got serviceberry and you've got the flowering dogwood. Not only are they pretty to look at in your yard, but they also serve a very big purpose and for our pollinators. So that kind of brings us to why pollination is really important for Hot Springs National Park. Because, again, we have a lot of land and a lot of plants that we actually have to take care of. And they actually help us cultivate it all and help us plant new seeds. Now, this is one of the things, this, as you recognize, is the Fordyce Bathhouse, the National Park's Historic Museum and Visitor Center. And hopefully, for all of you out there, this should make you very happy, but on May 4th, we are reopening our visitor center. So it will be open to the public again. Keep in mind that we are still following the CDC's rules and regulations for wearing mask covers. So if you're in the building, you do have to wear your face mask, so make sure you bring that with you. And we're only allowing 100 people in at the building at one time. So we will still have a visitor contact station set up outside where you can get your park information. We will actually have a contact station with the ranger outside on the porch as well to answer any of your park questions and information. And then there'll be several rangers on the inside of the building roving as you're kind of touring the building. And the other thing that we've got is tomorrow is going to be Parks for Pollination is going to be our BioBlitz. Now, our BioBlitz is going to have, we're going to have 2 different programs headed out that day for our BioBlitz. Where'd it go? There it is. So if you would like to come and help count all of our pollinators in the park, grab your butterfly nets, come to the park. We've got 2 guided hikes that will be leading out on May 1st. One's going to be from 9 to 12, and you're going to be, that's going to be field group number 1. It's going to allow everybody to come in. You'll be able to go in a group with a group leader. You're going to explore one of the 8 different locations in the park. I believe you'll just meet out here in front of the Fordyce Bathhouse. There's going to be group 2. Now they're going to go out, I think, around noon, from 12:30 to about 4 o'clock. It looks like, but there's going to be several partners that are going to be on the Arlington lawn doing a pollinator fair. So there's going to be different people out there talking about different species and pollinators as well. And I think that's all we've got for that. Now, if you like to be a part of the BioBlitz, this is a helpful website that or download app that you can use is through iNaturalist. You download the app, and if you see a pollinator, you can take a picture of it. It will go and store it for you, and then we'll have access to those photos that you take through the iNaturalist. Hot Springs National Park has a site already through them, so if you go on look for Hot Springs National Park, you're going to see one for mushrooms already, and I think another one that has actually amphibians or lizards. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'll answer as best as I possibly can. Here's some our parks websites. If excuse me, in our Facebook page and Instagram, feel free to join. And most of our upcoming programs and everything that we're going to do will be hosted on these sites right here. But I hope you enjoyed my program. And again, if you have questions, just ask. Thank you.
All right. Well, Ranger Lisa, thank you very much. That was great. We did get several comments and questions, and a lot of it you may have covered after they were already asked, but I'll, just go ahead and read it again. A lot of what you said bears repeating. All right. So Mia comments, one reason we are losing our pollinators is that people do not know which plants attract pollinators and which do not. It's a big deal. Typical landscaping plants do not attract pollinators.
Exactly. So there are, believe it or not, on the U.S. Forest Service site, they have a list of lots of native plants that you can actually go and find what's native here, what they like, what colors they like. I mean, so you can actually tailor your yard to what you want to bring in, which is really kind of cool. Especially if you're allergic to bees, you don't want to attract bees to your yard. So by doing those other things, planting those other things, especially like irises or trumpet honeysuckles, the only native honeysuckle that's in Arkansas, they're red, so they're really long. The yellow flowers and the white flowers, those ones aren't native here. They're actually very invasive. They'll take over. But there are many different websites that you can actually go to and get a whole list of plants that you can plant native.
Thank you. Katie asks, are pollinators in decline in hot springs? And if so, why?
So again, they're in decline everywhere, not just here in hot springs, but worldwide. And a lot of it is because of us. It's because of humans. We're building, we're expanding. We are doing, with logging, we're destroying habitats, I guess you can say. Hot Springs National Park, and luckily we've got 7 national parks in Arkansas. And that we preserve the land. So that's why it's really because of us, we've got small portions of the lands, but there's other places, with the help of state parks, they kind of follow the same guidelines as we do. But as we grow as a society and neighborhoods are growing and we're expanding and we're doing things, so they're losing their homes. And again, with invasive species is probably the biggest thing that parks are battling. When invasive species are entered into your park, either it be bug or plants, you've got the Japanese honeysuckle, the Chinese honeysuckle, privet, nandina. I mean, these are all invasive things. And so they can actually take over native plant spaces. And then native pollinators will eat from them and pollinate them instead of what they need to pollinate. The beetles, like the ash borer beetles, that's one of the reasons why we ask people not to bring in firewood, to use wood that's local from Arkansas, because if you're out of state and you're firewood, you might bring that beetle into our park. And then, if you go up to the top of the mountain tower, and if you're looking at that beautiful, overlook at the top of the mountain tower, you'll notice there's a stand of trees way in the back that are dead. That's either ash borer or it's the pine beetle. But those are invasives. And so that's the main reason when visiting a park, you want to make sure that you're bringing in local wood. State parks with like the lakes and stuff like that. There's other different types of invasive species that kind of take over them as well. But those are the things that we try to do, ask everybody to kind of help prevent that, so we can actually start building things back up again.
Another question, has the park planted flowers to increase food for pollinators?
So for the most part, like if you're on Bathhouse Row, it's very, we do have a lot of flowers. Some of it is what we call manicured. It's, because since it is with the city of Hot Springs, it's not as natural looking as the other, mountains areas. So we don't plant any flowers in those areas where it's all natural. But here on Bathhouse Row, we've got several plant species If you're by the Fordyce bathhouse, you'll notice like there's a whole row of azaleas, and azaleas are actually native to Arkansas. So that's kind of cool. I like that. And if you are from here, then you know, even in the wintertime, if you visit the park, those azaleas are still in full bloom. And a lot of that has to do with our thermal water. They're kind of confused. The thermal water actually heats their root systems up, so they don't know what time of year it is. They don't realize that they're supposed to be dormant and, kind of go in hibernation. So our azalea is always in bloom. So if there are any insects out there, you can still come and feed on the azaleas in Hot Springs National Park. So if you know any of those out there, just send them our way.
Comment from Crystal: it seems like the big agricultural sites should be required to maintain nesting spaces for the pollinators. After all, the pollinators are helping them produce their crops.
Exactly. And believe it or not, there are a lot of small farmers that actually do this. They will take like those bee boxes and they'll move those, those bee boxes all throughout their areas. If they notice that a section of their farmlands aren't being pollinated as well or it's not doing as well, they'll move bee boxes over there. So it actually will bring their things up. Now, big corporate things, I'm not for sure exactly if they do or not. But it is one of those things. It would be helpful if they did, because it would actually help them, in the long run. And, just like us, we use them to help pollinate the park. And it's kind of like free labor. So might as well use it.
Mia asked, what is an overwintering habitat here?
So overwintering habitat, luckily Hot Springs, for the most part, our winters are normally very mild. Except we have those few freak snowstorms like we had this year. But places for overwintering here is going to be like buildings and sheds. The trees that you'll kind of see that are kind of dead standing trees, that's going to be a lot of habitats in the park for those guys, for most of those insects. Butterflies, stuff like that, they normally migrate. So they migrate in, they migrate out. You guys are probably already starting to notice the monarchs. They're kind of fluttering in one at a time, but they come all the way from down south and they fly back up north and they kind of go back and forth. But for the bees are the only ones that don't kind of migrate. They all kind of stay here. So it's in the ground or in the dead trees that you kind of see that's in the park, and you can make homemade ones that you can keep in your yards as well.
You covered this a couple times since this question was asked. Patty says, what types of native plants can we plant to attract pollinators? And for the record, this video is recorded, so if anyone wants to go back and watch after the fact or share with anyone, it's here in the library's Facebook page in our videos tab or on our YouTube channel. So you can share this or rewatch if you need to, if you weren't able to watch it all or you need to listen to some information again. Let's see, Dana. Oh. Sorry, Dana said this is very interesting. Thank you so much. Mia asked, is there an online calendar of all the anniversary events listed?
If it is, our event should start being listed on our website under events. So if you go to www.nps.gov Hot Springs, it's going to take you to our webpage. Go to events and it'll have all of our events listed.
You got a ton of thank yous. So shout out to Karishma, Patty, Nellie, Katie, Crystal. Got a question from Tyler. Are there any artificial methods to pollinate plants in the absence of natural pollinators?
So there's not a whole lot besides us. I mean, if I know that a lot of scientists are kind of working on different things in case that a decline of pollinators actually really hits. Humans can pollinate plants because it is moving pollen from one plant to another. But to sit there and go to every flowering plant and sprinkle little bits of pollen in each one of those things, is going to take a lot of time. Excuse me. Again, allergies. So not too much is kind of being done on that thing. If anybody's out there can invent something, that'd be great. I said, besides for us actually doing it ourselves, I don't know of any other way. If it's not being done by, Pacific pollinators. There are things, some people will bring in certain things once one goes, but then again, then you're not creating a healthy ecosystem, because then you're introducing a non-species of some sort. So again, not very healthy.
There's been a lot of focus and publications over the years.
I can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me?
Barely. Okay.
There's been a lot of focus and different publications over the years about the importance of bees to our ecosystem. But what would hypothetically, or what could happen if we didn't have bees or other pollinators?
So hypothetically, and there's been a lot of talk about this, but so if we lost every pollinator ever worldwide, all pollinators all gone, people they're actually saying, like, within 3 years, human society would go with it, because plants would die, obviously, because nothing's pollinating them, right? Animals will die because they eat the plants, correct? We would die because we eat the plants and the animals. So if we have nothing to eat, that's what's going to happen. So it is very important to kind of keep these things kind of up and going. And it doesn't take a lot. I said, if even you have one little 5-gallon bucket that you're planting tomatoes in, that's a start. And if everybody planted one little 5-gallon bucket, then we're doing a big thing. And then, national parks, Arkansas state parks, U.S. Forest Service. They're all really big into this right now, because we're trying to maintain, our natural spaces. And we've, especially during the last year, the pandemic alone, the nation has realized how important outside spaces is, and to have that to go and enjoy, and just to be out in the open air, and to have nature there with us is very important to all of us. So it's one of those things where you kind of have to, work at it just a little bit at a time.
Private beekeeping is a somewhat popular hobby. Do you think it helps or hurts bee conservation?
So beekeeping is actually kind of it's kind of a great thing. And was here, the Europeans actually kind of started beekeeping, and honeybees are not really native to the United States. They were actually brought over from Europe. But they're again, they have like a different lifestyle than the native bees that we have here, because they live in a huge colony. They have a queen, and they normally stick with it. Now, the problem with them is it's a good thing, because they do pollinate a lot of the native plants, and we all enjoy eating the honey from it, so that's always a great thing too. But at the same time, since they're not a native bee, they kind of introduce different types of diseases. They can bring in other things that is not within themselves or within their network. And then a little bit of a fight for territory from time to time, because, they want their own little things and their things. But beekeeping is actually really great. There are several websites that will actually give you native queens. So if you want to start native beekeeping, you can do that as well, instead of going for the traditional honeybee.
That was my next question. Did you have any tips or resources for people that want to get involved in beekeeping?
So if there are a lot of pollination, especially through U.S. Forest Service, to be honest, they're great. Not only do they give you things for pollinators, but the native plants, and they've got links that kind of links you to other things. like the, getting native bees to actually help pollinate. They have that as well.
Okay. Well, last call for questions or comments. If anyone has them, I still see a couple there in the chat. Sparky asks, what are some of the common things that we should not plant?
So some of the common things you should not plant. Mimosa, which is that it's got that pink fluffy flower. It smells really, really sweet. I mean, that is a very invasive tree that grows here in Arkansas. It is not native. It does not belong here, but a lot of people plant it because they like the way it smells when the pink flower blooms. Wisteria is that really pretty cascading purple flower. And it is gorgeous, but it's a vine that flowers, and it will actually suffocate trees. But all pollinators love that wisteria, but it's kind of a bad plant to have. Honeysuckle is another thing you don't want to plant because it is the white and yellow one. They're not native to this area, and they will actually choke out a lot of the native plant species, kind of take over the whole area. And then you've got the Nanita plant, because it does have a white flower on it. So it too is very invasive, but not only is it kind of bad for native plants, but the berries on Nanita is actually poisonous for some birds. And so if they eat that berry, they'll die. So again, not very good. And that's the big one that our park is having a problem with right now. Is we're constantly doing an invasive species removal. We're always doing that constantly because that Nanita is like everywhere.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
Kind of.
Okay. I wonder what's going on. Someone said my mic is down, but sorry about that. Crystal comments, Privet, it drives me nuts in my yard.
So Privet drives her nuts? Uh-huh. Yep. I'm constantly fighting that at my house too. You have to pull that thing up by the root to actually get rid of it. But a lot of people like to plant it because it smells really sweet. It's got beautiful white flowers on it when it blooms. I mean, it's gorgeous plant, but it is very invasive. It is everywhere.
Karishma asks, Carpenter Bees, 20 to 30 of them, drilling holes in my house roof. Can I do something to get rid of them without harming them?
Oh, yeah, those are the ones those are native. We want to keep those guys. The best thing I can tell you on how to remove them is that there are a lot of beekeepers, and you're going to have to do like a specialist, a bee removal. But what they'll do is they're going to cut like a little hole out in your house, and they're going to pull that out, and they're going to remove the bees that way. But that's the only way that you can do it, is by getting a beekeeper to kind of come and remove them safely. Otherwise, the bad way. You don't want to do that one.
How do you spell the plant that kills birds?
Nanita, Nadina.
All right. Well, that's all we have, but I'm going to talk about a program real quick, and then I'll give you a chance to say anything else you'd like to say, Ranger Allen.
Okay.
Next week, Thursday, the same time, 6 p.m., we have a master naturalist, Belinda Jonak, who is going to be talking about dangerous wildlife that you might encounter and how you can respect it and appreciate it safely. And so that's next Thursday, May 6th, 6 p.m. And how about you let everyone know one more time what's going on and where they can find you?
Yeah, so tomorrow is going to be the Bio Blitz. So if you want to kind of come and help the park count its pollinators in the park, again, that'll be here tomorrow. Sign-up sheets will be, or they'll be out waiting for you in front of the Fordyce. And then May 4th, we're opening up the Fordyce. So we get to see the Rangers again. So we're all excited. And we're getting a little antsy. We're ready to see the public as well. So we're not going to be doing any guided tours of the Fortnite right now. It's all going to be self-guided, so keep that in mind. Again, make sure you bring your mask and 100 people at a time. So it might be a little bit of a wait. But other than that, hopefully we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Ranger Allen, and thank you all the National Park Rangers and people who work for the National Park Service. Oh, one more program, May 11th. We have the history of baseball in Hot Springs. So that's with Tyler from the National Park Service. So please tune in for that as well. And thank you again. And thank you everyone for watching and commenting. Be safe. Take care.